Silence is not empty. In the middle of a burning conflict, silence becomes the only sound that keeps breathing alive. Tonight's story begins inside a collapsing mission, where machines failed, radios betrayed their owners, and trained soldiers discovered that preparation could not replace instinct. This is not a tale of medals, rank, or heroic speeches. It is a story about a stranger whose name never entered official records. A man who carried no weapon, wore no uniform, and followed no command structure. Before this story truly unfolds, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your presence turns forgotten courage into shared memory. The mission was designed to be brief. A multinational rescue unit was deployed into a remote border valley carved between dense hills and abandoned agricultural settlements. Intelligence suggested a humanitarian convoy had been intercepted by a violent militia operating inside abandoned irrigation tunnels. A foreign engineer was believed to be alive and hidden underground. Satellite coverage could not penetrate layered stone roofs and tangled vegetation. Drone signals collapsed minutes after launch. The terrain resembled a maze built by erosion and war. Every map contradicted the next. Time pressure grew unbearable. Command insisted the window would close before sunrise. That assumption would soon become dangerously optimistic. His name was Arel Mendoza. He repaired water pumps and managed broken irrigation lines left behind when farmers fled. He lived in a temporary shelter beside a dried canal that still whispered at night when wind traveled through collapsed culverts. Soldiers never planned to meet him. He was noticed only because a damaged armored vehicle blocked the only usable road. Arel approached calmly with a toolkit, assuming the breakdown was civilian equipment failure. When he saw unfamiliar uniforms and anxious eyes scanning ridgelines, he understood something fragile was unfolding. He hesitated before offering assistance. Conflict had taught him hesitation protected families better than curiosity. The team leader asked a simple question through an interpreter. Do you know alternative access routes through the canal network? Arel closed his eyes briefly, remembering years spent crawling through collapsed drainage shafts searching for ruptured pipes. He remembered children trapped during floods, goats lost inside culverts, and neighbors rescued during landslides. He also remembered gunfire traveling farther underground than above open ground. Helping armed strangers invited unpredictable consequences. Still, the engineer's face appeared clearly in his memory. Arel had fixed the man's water purifier months earlier. He nodded slowly. A quiet agreement replaced complicated strategy. The mission's direction changed instantly. The abandoned canal system was older than the conflict. Concrete slabs covered narrow waterways built decades earlier to supply rice fields. Arel warned the unit about sudden drops masked by silt and vegetation. He explained how water still flowed beneath collapsed sections during rainfall, creating invisible cavities capable of swallowing weight. He showed how certain weeds only survived above active channels and how ants rebuilt hills after overnight flooding. The soldiers listened without interrupting. Their equipment felt suddenly oversized inside fragile corridors. Technology paused. Human observation took control. Arel walked ahead carefully, tapping surfaces with a metal rod. Each echo carried information no sensor provided. After 40 minutes underground, faint vibrations pulsed through the tunnel walls. Footsteps. Not heavy patrol movement. Nervous pacing. The rescue team froze. Arel tilted his head and touched the concrete surface, feeling temperature differences created by airflow from nearby chambers. He signaled right, away from the sound. The team leader hesitated briefly before trusting the gesture. Moments later, a distant metal door slammed where their original path would have led. Arel exhaled slowly. His palms trembled. Fear remained present, but purpose steadied his posture. Underground survival depended on noticing patterns others dismissed as coincidence. The network twisted unpredictably. Some sections flooded without warning due to damaged sluice gates. Arel guided them onto raised concrete lips barely visible beneath algae. One operator slipped and struck his shoulder against a wall. No complaints followed. Pain would slow progress. Arel slowed everyone deliberately, insisting on silence where water dripped rhythmically into shallow pools. He whispered how dripping patterns changed when movement disturbed air pockets deeper inside the structure. The team leader adjusted spacing immediately. Breathing became synchronized. The underground environment felt alive, reacting to intrusion. The mission transformed into a shared conversation between humans and decaying infrastructure. Arel stopped beside a collapsed junction. Beyond it lay a narrow maintenance shaft reinforced by rusted bars. He explained that maintenance workers once accessed pumping valves through that shaft. He also warned the floor beneath was hollow, carved by years of leaking pressure. Crawling was safer than walking. Without waiting for approval, he demonstrated slowly, distributing weight evenly across elbows and knees. The soldiers followed. Dust floated through headlamps like slow snowfall. Somewhere beyond the barrier, a muffled voice cracked through silence. The engineer was close. The rescue window narrowed again. Every choice now carried irreversible consequences. The chamber holding the captive was not heavily guarded. It did not need to be. The maze itself protected it. The engineer lay tied beside a generator powering ventilation fans. When the team entered, shock replaced fear on his face. He had believed rescue impossible. Extraction planning collapsed instantly when radio communication failed completely. Rock density blocked signals. Arel recognized the sound of rising groundwater beyond the walls. He whispered that the lower tunnel routes would flood soon. The only viable exit required crossing an abandoned filtration basin filled with unstable sediment. The team leader stared at him. No alternative remained. They moved quickly. The filtration basin resembled a shallow underground lake covered by floating debris. Beneath its surface, collapsed grates formed jagged pits. Arel guided the group along a barely raised ridge where sediment hardened differently. He marked each step by tapping the ground first. Halfway across, the engineer stumbled, sinking knee-deep into sludge. Panic rippled through the formation. Arel seized his arm and redistributed his weight, instructing him to lean backward rather than forward. The technique prevented suction from locking his leg completely. No shouting followed. Controlled breathing replaced instinctive struggle. The basin released them reluctantly. Behind them, distant voices echoed through intersecting tunnels. Someone had discovered the open chamber. Arel quickened the pace without abandoning caution. The exit shaft he selected had partially collapsed months earlier during monsoon flooding. He knew exactly where fractured slabs still held structural integrity. One misjudgment could bury everyone alive. The soldiers trusted him fully now. Rank dissolved into cooperation. No one questioned direction. The engineer leaned heavily against a wall, conserving strength. Water began seeping across the floor. Time compressed violently. The underground maze tightened around every decision. The final ascent required climbing through a ventilation duct filled with rusted wiring and loose brackets. Arel went first, clearing obstructions silently. He cut his palm on a jagged edge but ignored the sting. Pain delayed movement. Above them, faint moonlight filtered through a cracked grate. Freedom hovered dangerously close. As the engineer emerged into open air, distant headlights swept across the ridge. Someone had anticipated an escape attempt. Arel guided the team toward a dry spillway channel hidden behind collapsed fencing. Wind carried scent from nearby cooking fires. The group dropped low, crawling beneath thorn bushes without hesitation. At the temporary extraction zone, confusion waited. The designated landing area had been compromised. Footprints surrounded the clearing. The pilot aborted approach. Arel scanned the terrain instinctively. He recognized storm runoff patterns forming shallow grooves across the hillside. He pointed toward a broken aqueduct platform perched above a steep ravine. It was unstable but invisible from lower elevations. The only approach path was narrow and steep. Everyone followed without debate. Trust had replaced doubt entirely. Survival now belonged to the man who once fixed leaking pipes for displaced families. The irony was not lost on anyone breathing hard behind him. The helicopter finally reached visual contact. Wind flattened tall grass against fractured concrete. The engineer boarded first. As the team leader turned toward Arel, uncertainty crossed his expression. Civilian involvement complicated every report. Arel lifted his hand gently and shook his head. He belonged to this place, to broken infrastructure and fragile livelihoods. The leader pressed a small emergency beacon into Arel's hand, not for publicity, but for survival. Gratitude lingered silently between them. The aircraft lifted into darkness, leaving dust swirling around a man who had redirected fate without ever being scheduled to exist inside the mission plan. By morning, Arel repaired a damaged water valve beside his shelter. Neighbors complained about unreliable supply lines. Children chased each other along cracked concrete paths. Nothing resembled the chaos of hours earlier. Arel washed dried blood from his palm and replaced the rusted gasket he had postponed fixing. Radio broadcasts later mentioned a successful recovery operation somewhere along the border. No names appeared. No civilian contributions surfaced. Arel listened briefly, then turned the device off. Attention endangered communities. Silence preserved continuity. Ordinary routines felt heavier, yet strangely stabilizing. Life resumed its fragile rhythm with quiet determination. Weeks later, two unfamiliar officials arrived asking about tunnel access routes. Their questions avoided direct accusations. Arel responded carefully, discussing seasonal flooding, damaged culverts, and agricultural restoration delays. He mentioned nothing about foreign uniforms or midnight rescues. The visitors left politely, unconvinced but empty-handed. That evening, Arel relocated critical tools and emergency supplies to a secondary shelter uphill. Preparedness replaced fear. His neighbors never noticed the quiet reorganization. Protection required foresight, not public defiance. The mission had taught him something deeper than survival techniques. It clarified responsibility to people who would never know how close disaster had traveled. Months later, a sealed letter arrived through a humanitarian logistics office. The engineer thanked an unnamed local specialist whose courage restored more than freedom. The handwriting wavered across the page. No coordinates. No identifying details. Only gratitude and recovery updates. Arel folded the paper slowly and placed it inside a weatherproof case beside old maintenance records. Healing did not arrive with celebration. It arrived with small, stable moments. It arrived when nightmares stopped interrupting sleep. It arrived when fear loosened its grip on memory. Loss never disappeared. Its edges softened enough to allow ordinary hope to return quietly. Development projects eventually transformed sections of the valley. New irrigation systems replaced damaged channels. Tourism proposals circulated cautiously. Arel trained younger workers to identify unstable soil and safe access routes through aging infrastructure. He taught them how airflow changes inside culverts and how wildlife behavior reveals underground movement. Knowledge was never framed as heroism. It was framed as stewardship. Protecting forgotten systems meant protecting people who depended on them unknowingly. His influence expanded invisibly. The landscape carried fewer secrets, but respect for it grew deeper. Quiet guidance preserved more than any emergency response team could document. Sometimes Arel returned to the collapsed junction where everything shifted. He listened to water traveling beneath concrete and vegetation, reclaiming fractured surfaces. He felt no regret. Fear still existed, but it no longer dictated direction. He had not become extraordinary. He had clarified what ordinary responsibility demanded. Arel was not a soldier. He was not a strategist. He was a caretaker of passageways, timing, and survival knowledge learned through hardship rather than training exercises. Humanity, he realized, rarely required force. It required someone willing to act when hesitation felt safer than conscience. This story is not about elite units or classified operations. It is about how quiet lives collide with irreversible consequences when empathy replaces self-protection. A broken canal, a collapsing shaft, and one unplanned decision became a bridge between failure and return. Somewhere beyond official reports and filtered headlines, compassion continues shaping outcomes no lens captures. History belongs to those who preserve truth without demanding acknowledgement. Perhaps the greatest legacy is not recognition, but the courage to protect strangers when nobody expects your name to matter.